Good afternoon. Well, obviously, today we're disappointed with the jury's verdict. I can't even imagine what this must feel like for the family of Philando Castile, his friends, and all those that loved him, and also for Diamond Reynolds. I'm just really sad for them. And I really believe that as a community, we should pray for them because, they have suffered so much as a part of all of this. And I really ask that our community has all the empathy and the sympathy for them. Our position throughout this case was that Philando Castile did nothing that justified the taking of his life. From our perspective, and what we were trying to prove was that Philando Castile was simply following Officer Yanez's commands and orders to retrieve his license. And just as he said the moments before being shot, and as he was lay dying in his car, he said he wasn't reaching for it. And we gave it our best shot. We really did. And I'm just so proud of the team that we assembled as a part of this. But we really did, and we put our heart and soul into it. And I'm not the only one disappointed. I'm speaking for this entire group because we really put our heart and soul into that. When Officer Yanez chose to use lethal force, as we said, there was no imminent threat. And we tried our best to prove that he didn't see a gun and that Castile wasn't pulling it out. And the toughest part for me, with respect to those facts, is that he was so respectful in how he disclosed that he had that firearm. He said, "Sir, I have to tell you that I do have a firearm on me." And he went beyond what the law requires. He was compliant, he wasn't resisting, and at the end of the day, this was a traffic stop. Unfortunately, the jury didn't see it that way. And another thing that we were fighting for as a part of this particular case was we were fighting for the integrity of this process. I know that this case went worldwide, nationwide. And because of that, and because of the Facebook Live video, and just the sadness of seeing somebody die on video, that got people upset and sad and angry, and they were demanding that criminal charges be filed immediately. And one of the things that's so important in the role of a prosecutor is for us to be ministers of justice. We don't prosecute people just because we want to, or we think that that's what the public wants us to do. There's a process that is involved. And we fought for that fair and impartial investigation. And I want to thank the BCA for their efforts and their fact-gathering to submit to us, the prosecutors, who ultimately had to make the decision about whether or not criminal charges were warranted. And we took our time, and we consulted a national use of force expert. And we were thoughtful, and we were thorough, and we had great conversations, important conversations within our team about probable cause and whether or not we could prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And we thought that we could. And throughout that whole process, there was political pressure by the community, the public, that was coming down to us saying, "Release that video because we need to see it now." And we resisted because the process is important. And at the end of the day, that video is evidence. And so I'm really proud of the way that we handled the charging decision, the investigation, because I think that is critical. And we tried to be transparent as much as we could. But in the context of the investigation, we did what we needed to do. And then after criminal charges were filed, we had a robust adversarial process, and that's what the criminal justice system is. It's an adversarial process where the prosecution seeks to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and defense counsel, to the best of their ability, ensures that they hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we uphold the rights of the accused. And I believe that process came to a completion today. I can't say enough about the trial team that was involved. I have just been very impressed with their effort and their diligence and all of their great work on this particular case. Rick Dusterhoff, Clayton Ross, Jeff Paulson, and Raul Shah. They did remarkable work. I also want to thank the United States Department of Justice because we had asked for their assistance very, very early on. And they were involved with monitoring this investigation, but also offering Jeff Paulson. And I want to thank former United States Attorney Andy Lugar and our current acting United States Attorney Greg Brooker. I also want to thank our Special Prosecutor Don Lewis and his associate Jen Cornell, who helped us with the charging decision. And I also want to thank defense counsel as well, because they aggressively represented their interests of their client, and that's an important part of this adversarial process. This case, and this is an important point that I really want to make. You know, this case has always been about the actions and the inactions of Officer Yanez. This has never been an indictment of law enforcement as a whole. Just like in any other profession, one person's mistakes does not mean that the profession is bad. And I am very saddened by this divide that I see that's happening with our community trust and law enforcement, and those are things that we really, really need to work on, because I, as somebody who has always been supportive of law enforcement, and I still am today, the work that they do is so critical to our public safety. They do things that many of us in this room would never even imagine doing. And so we should always be thankful and grateful for the work that they do. You know, I also don't doubt that Officer Yanez is a decent person, as people testified in court. But he made a horrible mistake from our perspective. And that's what this case was about, that, you know, good people can also make mistakes. And I know that if he could, he would take back what he did, and we all wish, and he would too, that this never happened. But unfortunately, we can't. You know, American society has traditionally placed a lot of deference and respect to law enforcement, and rightly so. It's articulated in the Supreme Court case of Graham versus Connor that we take into account that the job of an officer is a dangerous one, and they have to make split-second decisions, and that there are situations that change rapidly. But when we use and we evaluate an officer's use of force, we look to that case, and we will continue to do so. But we just could not with respect to the facts of this case. Now, the hard part and the most important part of what I have to say to the public, and this is the part that I hope that all of you will include in your reporting. As hard as this is for some members of our community, we have to accept this verdict. It was the product of a fair and impartial investigation, thorough prosecution review, and a trial by a jury of Ramsey County residents. Their decision must be respected, because that is the fundamental premise of the rule of law. I want to thank Judge Leary for ensuring a fair trial, and I know that this case generated critical conversations about police-community relations, and those conversations really must continue for the sake of our officers, for the sake of our residents, so that something like this never happens again. And I hope that we will be intentional about listening to one another and work on bridging the gaps that exist today. That said, I understand that this verdict brings a lot of hurt and pain and deep-seated frustration for a lot of people in this community. And I suspect that they want to express their pain. And protests and demonstrations truly are the foundation of our democracy, and I'm sure that people may choose to express their voices. However, please, in the honor and memory of Philando Castile, please do so peacefully. Violence only begets more violence, and we do not want anyone getting hurt. In the words of the great civil rights leader of our nation, Dr. Martin Luther King, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have time for a couple questions. Let's start right off.
Yeah, Todd Melby, Reuters. I talked to Earl Gray, one of the defense attorneys, and he said that, in my opinion, the case never should have been charged. It was charged because of political pressure.
And it wasn't, and I think I addressed that in my remarks.
You don't have no further remarks?
No, I don't want to engage in a response to that because it wasn't. Imagine if this case wasn't charged. I mean, throughout the trial, evidence was produced that certainly would justify the charges in this case. There was ample evidence if the jury wanted to, if they chose to choose those facts, they could have had a conviction, and Judge Leary would have dismissed these cases. If it was purely a political type of prosecution, then, hold on, let me finish. He had the opportunity to dismiss the case when the defense made that motion, and then he had the opportunity after we presented our case. So no, nothing of that kind.
So when you say, imagine if this case wasn't charged, what do you mean by that?
Well, from that perspective, I mean, all the facts that came out in the trial, I mean, my God, I mean, this case had to be charged. There were so many facts that needed to have consideration by a jury. So that's our perspective, yeah.
Today, the jury asked for Yanez's testimony to be reread in its entirety, and Tuesday they asked for a transcript of the VC interview that wasn't played during the trial. Should the state have played that 1-hour interview during its case instead of trying to offer it during the defense's presentation on Friday?
You know, I'll have a chance to maybe address that. I mean, this is not the last time that I'll speak to all of you, but I don't really want to get into the play-by-play of going backwards with respect to the trial.
But it seemed like a big issue for the jury. They asked 2 times to hear from Officer Yanez.
And I didn't make that decision, so.
John.
And Philando Castile's mother, Valerie, has called repeatedly to respect the process, to let it go through, and this was the result for her. What's your response to people like her who didn't trust in the system, but gave it the benefit of the doubt, and at least from her perspective, failed here?
Say thank you. And I'm sorry that it didn't work out as the Castile family would have liked. But the process, we can't control it other than the fact of just doing the best that we can. The defense does the best that they can, and it's a product of that adversarial system.
Is this going to build more distrust in the criminal justice system?
I hope not.
Any other questions?
I think you kind of answered it already, but I just want to clarify for sure. Do you intend to retry this case at all, and if so, when? It sounds like you don't. It sounds like you're not going to.
We would be prohibited from doing so. You can't.
You can't?
No.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
The jury came back with a verdict of not guilty.
Question from
Kirsten from 5 Eyewitness News. You talked about that dash camera video that was played in court for the jury.
Yes.
We're told that'll be released by your office, and when it is, do you think when it's seen by the public, people will understand a little bit more into the jury's mindset? What do you think the reaction is going to be from folks when they see that video?
Well, I think what I would ask for for the public as they review that video is to recognize there's many different perspectives. There was our perspective from the prosecution, and we felt, that the charges were warranted and the facts would support a conviction. There were also that facts that you will see in the video that will also go towards the explanation and the defense arguments. And so I would ask that the public be thoughtful in viewing that and take into account that a jury in Ramsey County has found the defendant not guilty.
2 more questions.
Yeah, Mitch Smith, New York Times. Thanks, sir. You talked about the process here, the public pressure that built for those charges, and your desire to bring Officer Yanez up the right way, not releasing that video from the start. Now that there's been an acquittal, what should people who were pressing that pressure for the charges, what should they make of how the system worked here? How should they interpret what transpired today?
Well, I hope that they believe that the way that we processed this case, like I said, was focused on the facts and the law and making sure that the gathering of those facts were fair and impartial, and that when we made this decision, we were focusing on whether or not people around the table that would be involved with trying this case believed that we had a reasonable likelihood of being able to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that didn't occur, but that's a part of what our process is. And then, of course, it goes into the trial process, and ultimately a jury decides. And, of course, another thing, too, and we've always stressed this, that the standard of proof in a criminal case is incredibly high. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And you need all jurors to agree to that. So.
Last question.
Case out the case, with the decision that has been made, do you feel America is going to have any respect for law enforcement after today?
I would say that we have to. Law enforcement and police are necessary in our community to ensure that we have public safety, but I think anybody in law enforcement would say that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it needs to happen from all perspectives. And I think the conversation that's been generated from this case and others should continue. But oftentimes what I see is that we're not really listening to one another. And I know that there's a lot of emotion involved with these types of issues, but I think that conversations can continue. But somehow we've got to figure out a way to bridge the gaps that exist.
Okay, thank you
Great,
very
thank
much.
you.
I'll stick around for